Yeah, hi. So I'm Ari Hollander, and yeah, I've been doing VR for a long time, 25 years last count. And you know, I'm excited about where we are right now because this is an opportunity. You know, all of us VR visionaries, we get to be cutting edge now, and that's an improvement. So it's exciting. So just a little teeny bit about my background. So I started off my career, as it were, doing some strange things. Like as an undergraduate, I worked for Lucasfilm in their games division and did some. I was in the game tester pit. That was a fantastic summer job for an undergrad. And then I also did some work for the Grateful Dead. I did some computer animation for their big screen, and I actually worked on an album cover. But then I left when I graduated from UC Berkeley, my degree in astrophysics, I decided to continue my career in applied science fiction by going to the University of Washington to study virtual reality at the HIT Lab, which is one of the first places in the country that you could study virtual reality. It was very exciting. And so I was there for a bunch of years, did my degree, finished that, and then became a research engineer in the lab and did things with kids and did an educational outreach program, took virtual reality vans out to all kinds of places in Washington and Nebraska, 120 public schools, things like that. Also worked on novel input systems trying to make virtual reality actually functional for doing real work, which is still kind of an issue today, and I'm hoping that we'll make some inroads on that. Anyway, enough about me. So this talk, here's an overview. I'm going to tell you about how virtual reality is going to change the world, and I'm also going to talk about why it's now that this is happening, and then we're going to get into the sort of the meat of the talk, talking about changing humans, spiders, snowmen, cyber therapy, strange things like that. You'll see what that means. Real-time personalized medicine, that's my current thing. And then if there's time, I'll tell you a story. But we'll see if there's time, because I've been adding slides after listening to some of the other talks, and so it may be in a hurry. We'll find out. So one of the things I added was there was all this talk about virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality, and this bugs me. We're wasting a lot of time talking about this false trichotomy. And it's, I call it a false trichotomy because they really are all the same. People talk about, well, virtual reality, you're blocking out the real world. You're not blocking out the real world in virtual reality. In virtual, you've got, this is a visual bias. You've got at least 6 other senses we're dealing with, including your vestibular sense and your proprioceptive sense. And you cannot block without taking extreme measures, those. So I would say that virtual reality, as defined, doesn't exist. And it would be pretty scary if we had it to a certain extent. So all of these technologies are basically the same thing, but they're different places on an evolutionary, technological evolution. Mixed reality, augmented reality is kind of a poor implementation of mixed reality, or a primitive implementation of mixed reality. Mixed reality knows a lot about the environment, but doesn't really give you a wide field of view yet, things like that. Virtual reality doesn't know anything about the environment yet, but the current set of affordances there is much more immersive. And so my statement is that all that will merge, and in the future, these will be meaningless distinctions. And you can turn all of them into each other by making virtual reality transparent, adding a camera, or changing an optical pathway. You can make augmented reality or mixed reality into virtual reality by putting the blast screen down, right? So it's all the same. But for the purposes of this talk, and hopefully for the purposes of going forward, I like the term virtual much better, the word virtual much better than I like mixed. It's kind of mixed. And so virtual is much more interesting. And augmented, well, I wouldn't touch that term too much. But anyway, anyway, onward and forward. The first reason why I think virtual reality will change the world is that it changes the boundaries of space and time. And that's a pretty big deal, but if you think about it, radio and television changed the way that space and time work for us. if you think about the big events of the 20th century, you know, very few people actually present for those events, but everyone remembers where they were when they happened. If you think about the big events of the 21st century, I predict that what's going to happen is that because of virtual reality, everyone will be present at those events, but very few people will remember where they were. And so, you know, it's a new way of looking at things and a new way of looking at space and time. It's going to be a big change. That was not, however, the main reason I think that it's going to change the world. It does extend the scope of human experience. So, you know, VR is not just something you see. It's a synthetic experience, and the experience is the key there, because, you know, you remember experiencing a virtual world like you remember being in a place and having an experience. And so that extends our world into new domains of experience, and that's really kind of interesting and exciting. Because if we're making just bad copies of the real world in VR, then we're missing the point. And a lot of people aren't missing the point, because there's some really fabulous things going on out there. But that is also not the main reason I think that virtual reality will change the world, though it's a good one. The main reason is that VR can change you. Virtual reality is the highest bandwidth we have to the brain of any medium. And this gives us some unprecedented levers into the psyche, into the physiology in a lot of ways, and we'll talk about that some more. And because more and more we're discovering that the boundaries between the brain and the body are really kind of permeable, soft. And so that's a big change. So why is it that this thing is happening now? Lots of people talk about it's the technology. I don't think it's the technology. I mean, if you look at what's going on, if you look at what we had last year in VR, with not this year, the stuff this year is better finally, but what we had last year is not really vastly better than what we had in the 90s. It's the technology was more expensive then, certainly, but it wasn't the availability of that technology that kept it back. There were some inroads that makes, there might be a critical threshold of, well, when the resolution gets this good, then it's worth buying, but I don't think that was it, because we had consumer VR gear back then. What's changed is the culture has changed. And so this is arguably the most important date in the history of games. Now, arguably, and I'm kind of glad that date has some other positive associations with it. But the Atari VCS debuted on that day in 1977, and to invoke the patron saint of games for change, Johann Huizinga, is that how you pronounce it? Huizinga? Huizinga. Okay. You sound authoritative. I like that. So anyway, he talked all about how games, how play is critical to our psychology and critical to who we are as a civilization as well as individuals. And it fundamentally changed when we introduced this kind of interactive media. I mean, there's various other interactive kinds of play, obviously, because sports, things like that are very interactive. But this gives us a tool set where we can really have control over what's going on, have it respond to you in interesting ways, and it changes a lot of things. It created the foundation for what I think of as the interactive age. But why? What's going on here? So, one generation after the introduction of the Atari, basically the 5-year-olds of 1983, so if you go forward to when Atari actually had a big market penetration, this is what the generation curve looks like. So 2007, you'll see that the peak of that generation curve. This is the second generation of Atari users, or interactive media. And here is a graph, very unscientifically gathered, by the way, because I pulled these numbers off the internet. But here's a graph of the size of different media industries. And look what happened around 2007, 2008. Video games passed movies and music combined back then, right at that peak there. So it was an indoctrination into our culture of this interactive media thing, and it shows up right there on the dollar signs. And so as you can see overlaid there, it's 2 generations playing that game, it really changed some things. But did it change who we are? Well, there was some interesting research that I showed. Here's one indication of it. There's a researcher by the name of Jane Gackenbach, and she did some studies with gamers, and she's a dream researcher. And so she was looking at the dreams of gamers as compared to the dreams of people who didn't grow up with games, didn't play a lot of games and so forth. And she found significant differences. She found that gamers were much more likely to have lucid dreams, to be aware that they're dreaming, and to be able to control their dreams. And that's really interesting, because the dreams are pretty important to who we are. But it went further than that, because she then started doing studies of military populations and looking at returning vets. And one of the things about post-traumatic stress is that people tend to have these nightmares of helplessness. They couldn't do anything. And the video gamers were much less susceptible. It was really kind of an interesting phenomenon. She stopped just short of saying that, well, maybe we should inoculate people with video games in order to prevent them from getting PTSD. So that's an example of how just the whole video game phenomenon really changed us and gives us a clue into how we might use it as a lever in psychology. So I worked on a bunch of different PTS therapy apps. Actually did a little bit of work on a 9/11 simulation. This one here, Bus Bomb Survivor, was for suicide bomb attack victims in Israel. So we did a graded exposure therapy thing there. And then I did a couple applications for Iraq and Afghanistan vets. These are therapy tools. These are things that you equip a psychologist with, and you say, okay, you put this into your bag of tricks, because one of the most effective therapies for treating PTS is to get the person with PTS to tell the story of what happened to them, what their traumatic event was. And unfortunately, one of the primary symptoms of PTS is pathological avoidance of anything that has to do with what happened to them. So how do you crack that nut? And so this was one way. Also worked on, so earlier on even, I worked on, my first cyber therapy application was arachnophobia therapy, and that was kind of cool and interesting, especially since I got to meet Alan Alda. He came and did an episode of Scientific American Frontiers. What do you say?
I'm sorry, I saw that on TV.
Yeah.
He's acting like, oh my God, this is so cool.
Yeah. So this was a while ago, but so we did some work with that. So what's key here in exposure therapy, and what's key here about VR and exposure therapy, is that you react to VR as if it was real, even if it's a really goofy, cheesy-looking spider. You still, your body tells you that's real. Your brain tells you subliminally that's real, even though you know it's not real. So first of all, clinical arachnophobes, like the woman in the video there who was so afraid of spiders that she would duct tape up the doors and windows of her house. She was willing to try and have an encounter with a virtual spider, because it's a virtual spider. But when you get in there and she starts sweating and all the physiological symptoms come in, she's reacting to it as if it were real, and her brain and body say that's the case. And so that's why it's such a powerful tool in that context. So this is also a real augmented reality or mixed reality application, and then we put a little tracker on the rubber spider with a tuft of fur. And so when Alan Alda reaches out to touch it, he's not expecting to feel anything, and so that's why he freaks out so much here. But anyway, so adding the mixed reality element there really enhances presence, and presence is key to almost all of these techniques that I'm talking about here, because the more present you are, the more effective they are. So let's talk about pain relief, or virtual reality pain relief, or VRPR as we've been calling it. So this work was inspired by work by Ramachandran. Phantom limb pain was the thing that he was working on, and he had a theory about what was going on in the brain, and he put together this really simple, cheap virtual reality, since he said, well, I can't afford these expensive systems. Back then they were, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so he put together this mirror box, and reflecting the healthy limb in the position of the phantom limb was able to essentially ultimately erase the phantom limb, but it cured a lot of the pain that people were having. You know, if their limb was in a sling and clenched up for a long time beforehand, and then it was amputated, the phantom limb was clenched up and it was horribly painful. And so how do you treat that? So he did this and had tremendous results. And so, but he was talking about these kinds of things, and Hunter Hoffman and Dave Patterson and Tom Furness and some other people at the University of Washington said, well, we've got a VR system. Let's try it, but let's try it with a different population. And so they used burn victims. They actually took Spider World, so I worked on the very first VR pain relief application. They took Spider World and they put a 16-year-old with a deep flash burn on his leg that required surgery and staples, horribly painful stuff, and also another 17-year-old with severe burns over 35% of his body. They tried them in VR during wound care. And so imagine, here you are, you're burned over 35% of the body, and now we're going to scrub those wounds. We're going to clean the dead tissue out. Excruciating. These are the kind of things that drugs are not good enough to help you with. And they got phenomenal results. Things like 50% reduction in pain from being in virtual reality. And so that opened up a whole bunch of work that followed that. So here's just in the background here. So this is a while ago that I did a count, but I tallied at least 18 papers that were written about Snow World, which was the next application that they built for this. It was first built in about 1998, 99, and since then there's been a ton of work that's been inspired by that. This is, it's a real simple virtual reality game. They were using these big clunky HMDs, but they built Snow World because now they had low-cost systems that only cost $50,000. And so they did that, and they took them out, and they tried them. This is a video of Sam Brown, who was injured in a IED explosion in Afghanistan. Sam Brown's experiences made a lot of news, and I'll show you something, but well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So lots of work with this. Snow World has been used with all different ages. They've done induced pain studies, they've done wound care studies, physical therapy, occupational therapy, wounded vets, all kinds of cancer patients, just various procedural pain and conditions. They've done a lot of subjective pain ratings for studying this on a scale of 1 to 10. How much pain do you feel? And then also fMRI studies. They've looked at how it affects the brain activity. They actually made a magnet-friendly, so a VR helmet with no metal in it. That was a good, neat trick. And it's been used with drugs, instead of drugs. It's been used multiple treatments to see if it stands up over time, and it has. And what's really interesting is that you get the most pain relief with the people who have the most pain. And so that's a really nice combination. So getting back to Sam Brown, his story went out all over the news. It was a great story. It was interesting. And it actually inspired a playwright to write a stage play about a piece of software and about one particular soldier's journey through recovery and reintegration in the real world using virtual reality. Kind of an interesting set of things. But this was actually produced here in New York last year, and there's a new production down in Atlanta in the fall. So kind of weird. That was an experience, having someone make a play about software that you worked on. Weird. There have been a bunch of different versions of Snow World. So that was actually the second version of Snow World on the left there, the 2002 version. We rebuilt it in 2006 for the Design Life Now exhibition. Oh, okay. And that's good. And then we rebuilt it again in 2009, so you can see the evolution there. I was talking about before the talk briefly that we made different versions of it to test the metaphorical content and discovered that metaphor really wasn't that important, at least in that study. But so how effective is it? They did comparisons between, there's been several studies like this, but they've done comparisons between virtual reality, between virtual reality and opioids, and between virtual reality, opioids, plus opioids. I'm stumbling here. And this was the kind of results they got for pain unpleasantness. They asked people to rate how unpleasant was their pain. This is the kind of results they got for times thinking about pain. So you can see there's some dramatic stuff going on. And then, of course, there's this. So interesting. So now, once again, this is what the research showed. I'm not as we said, if the FDA or the FDC is listening, we're not making any claims for anything that we're doing that that you will experience this, because we know actually that there is a subset of the population that it just doesn't work for. And so, however, it can have an even visceral effect directly on your body. And I'll just let you take a look at that, and I'll not make the poop joke. So what is it doing? Well, we're hacking the brain. We're using this massive bandwidth to the senses, and we're doing things like, all these. I'm going to advance here. Mental focus is all about, people call it distraction a lot of time. I like to think about it as we're focusing you on something other than your pain, and that actually creates differences in the brain, which I'll talk about. We're also hacking the body map, in essence, sort of a neuroplasticity kind of thing, like the phantom limb pain, and I'll show you some implications of that later. But another part of it that I think is really actually important is that we are letting people be an active agent in their own healing. They're doing something that doesn't hurt, that's making them feel better. They're actively engaged with it. It's enjoyable. And so, because so much of medicine is done to you, and that's just really not the best thing. So they've done fMRI studies, as I said. It changes things in your brain. Whoops, back up here. It changes things in your brain. We've watched it shift the brain activity from the pain centers to these other active areas. And that's a phenomenal to get a photograph of how this technology and these systems makes an impact on your brain. So kind of cool stuff. And so it's been, as I said, 15 years of research on this stuff, tons of papers. I saw something like 200 papers total in the whole literature about virtual reality pain relief. So it's time to get it out of the lab and into the real world where it can do something. So we started a company to do some of this stuff. So we've got our first application out there in hospitals and clinics, and we're doing a slow rollout right now, but we're gonna crank it up. We want to get it out into people's homes as well. The first results have come back from some clinical trials of this, and you probably can't read any of the details, so I'll zoom them in. But this study, most of the work, as I talked about before, have been done with acute pain. Hundreds of studies in acute pain, 3 or 4, maybe 5 in chronic pain, so not a lot of work. And chronic pain is the big problem. There are 100 million North Americans, what was that? Thank you. 100 million North Americans who are suffering from chronic pain. And so, if we can do something for them other than give them an addictive narcotics, then that would be fantastic. And so this study was presented, as I said, at the American Pain Society, and had some off-the-charts results. And one of the really interesting, the magnitude of the pain reduction effects by itself is exciting. But what was really amazing was that it was a sustained relief, that from a 5-minute exposure to virtual reality, some of these chronic pain patients got 2 to 48 hours of relief. And so, that's just, it's like, whoa. And so this is one of the things, it's like distraction does not explain this. It's something like, there's some researchers working on the idea that what we're doing is we're hacking your body map. And giving you literally an out-of-body experience and giving you time to reconnect with your body in a more functional way. And so that makes a great deal of sense, especially for chronic pain patients. So what we're talking about here is pain relief in software. Think about what that means. It means that we can scale this. It means that we can distribute it over the internet. Especially as people start getting all this VR gear in their homes in greater and greater numbers. That's what's really exciting about now. But it does another thing, and that is that with the explosion of consumer biosensors, and we saw a lot of presentations at this conference about the neuro headsets and things like that, you can use some of those to detect pain. And so if we can detect pain, and then we've got and tell that to the computer, and then we've got a mechanism for relieving pain, well, we've got a closed loop. And that means that we can do dynamic, real-time, personalized medicine. And that, or at least we have a chance of being able to do that. This is something that we're working towards. And that's tremendous. So we're building a platform with an AI engine behind it to take all these different inputs and maybe eventually electronic medical records, things like that, to dynamically change what's going on in the environment to suit it to not just who you are, but how you are in the moment. And that's really exciting to me, because this means that we'll be able to have a new way of doing these kinds of things. And we want to open up this platform to allow other people to develop their cool, amazing VR pain relief apps and other applications as well, because there's a whole collection of different kinds of things you could do besides just pain relief. And let's see, we don't have enough time for this story. Do you have 2 minutes? I don't know if I can do this story in 2 minutes. I'll try. Okay. Okay, so, but I have to ask for spare change first. Does anyone have a couple pennies or something like that? No? No spare change? You have to pay the storyteller. Okay, that'll work. Okay, so in 1994, you can tell it was the last century because the photograph is black and white. There was a guy by the name of Tom Rees who came to the Hit Lab, and he had Parkinson's disease. And Parkinson's is this, if you're not familiar with it, it's a real strange neurological disorder, the kind of thing that Oliver Sacks wrote about. And one of the symptoms is that people have trouble initiating the motion of walking. And so they want to start walking and they can't. That there's something wrong with that neural pathway. And so one of the solutions that people have discovered that you can take a coin, drop a coin on the floor, and there's a visual cue. I can step over that, and that starts them walking, and then they can keep walking. But I say you stop at the crosswalk and have another coin next to this gentleman here. They drop that down here, and step over that, and start walking again. But that's a pretty inconvenient solution. And so he came to the lab and said, well, can you do something for me with virtual reality? So I can't use it. But so what we did, Suzanne Weghorst and Tom he's in the foreground, that picture, Tom Finesse, and I put together a augmented reality system that had blocks sliding towards you on the ground. And so now you take this thing with him and step over them whenever you want it. So that was kind of cool, a little technological solution to the problem. But what we had just done is we had traded a inconvenient low-tech to an inconvenient high-tech solution. And so they're not so great. So instead, we came up with a simple thing. We simplified the virtual world. We simplified it down to the simplest virtual world you can have, a 1-bit laser pointer. For those of you who can't see in the back, a 1-bit virtual world. There is my augmented world. There is my visual cue. We put a laser pointer on a headband. He stepped over the spot, and he could walk normally with that. And that went more normally. And that was fabulous. But then one day, he said, well, I've discovered that I can turn the laser off and imagine the spots. And so we used VR to reprogram his brain. And that was tremendous. It shows us what we can do with this technology. And this is one of the reasons